Best-selling author Jill McCorkle is known for mining memories and secrets in her acclaimed novels. In her latest book, Hieroglyphics, she explores the layers of the past as an archaeologist might decode an ancient language. Told from multiple points of view, Hieroglyphics explores family secrets with McCorkle's trademark wit and wisdom. In this interview, McCorkle talks about digging deep to create her characters and plot, and about the writing life. Jill McCorkle, thank you so much for being with us today to talk about your new book.
Thank you. A pleasure to be here.
Your new book is titled Hieroglyphics. Can you just tell us a little bit about it for those who haven't read it yet?
Sure. It really is a novel about memory. It focuses on four main characters: an elderly couple, Frank and Lil, who have recently retired from their home in Massachusetts of many years to North Carolina to be near their daughter. And they also happen to be near the place where Frank spent a portion of his boyhood. So he is becoming more and more obsessed with getting back into that house and yard to see how it compares to his memories. The people living in the house, a young single mother, Shelley, and her son, Harvey, who are in a very difficult place in life and not wanting to let this stranger into their home. So there's that situation. And then Frank's wife, Lil, is meanwhile spending her time collecting all of her old journals and notes and pieces of her life and trying to put them in some order. In many ways, she's editing her life for her children and making decisions about what they may or may not need to know.
Fantastic. And I have to tell you before we go any farther how much I loved this book. I'm going to reread a lot of it just to linger on the page a little bit longer. I had a deadline here to read it by, and I'm like, I got to go back. And just because your prose is so beautiful. You know, you talked about the characters and the multiple characters telling the story. And so each chapters are in different points of view. And you have those voices just so spot on. How do you do that?
You know, I spend a lot of time thinking about these individuals, and I also find that they grow a lot over the course of a novel. Lil's voice came most easily because she's in first person, because hers is all, you know, these past letters and journal entries put together. But with the other characters, I found the way into the voice was when I found what they were passionate about or obsessed with, frightened about. As soon as I had a toehold on that aspect of their character, the voices became more clear because I had a vocabulary to work with. Frank has taught archaeology courses, and that gave me an entry there. And Shelley is a court stenographer with this murder trial going on in the background, and that gave me a foot with her. And then Harvey, the kid, you know, he has interests ranging from the most benevolent things like Einstein, the world's tiniest horse, to the Menendez brothers and Lizzie Borden. I mean, he's all over the place with his interests. So that was a lot of fun.
And he has very vivid imagination. Yeah, and so it's almost like, you know, I really feel like I'm in the head of one of my children years ago. You talked about Frank being an archaeologist. To me, there's a lot of resonance in that, with digging up of the past, Lil writing her letters to the future generation. Was that all in your mind as you started, or how did that come about?
This novel was in a million pieces for a very long time. It was like a lot of fragments looking for a plot. And as soon as I had the present timeline firm in my mind, then it became a little bit easier to put the pieces together. I knew that I wanted in the backdrop these two real historic events that happened, catastrophic events that robbed both Lil and Frank of a parent early in life. One is a train wreck that happened in my native North Carolina county, so I had grown up hearing about it. A crash that happened in 1943, and then also the Coconut Grove nightclub fire in Boston that happened in 1942. So each of them lost a parent only about a year apart, a defining moment, not just for these individual families losing a loved one, but both were events that pulled the whole community together and really did establish a kind of before and after in a community, and all the effects and all the lives affected. And so I think that in many ways this novel is about that kind of before and after, and how we can't help but be affected by what came before us, even if we're not aware fully of that.
The title, of course, well, hieroglyphics, you think of Egyptian writings, and then I think of Lil writing letters to her children.
Absolutely. And I had all kinds of writing in mind. Shelley's taking shorthand, which is another language. Harvey has a Klingon decoder ring. Frank, as a boy, had a Captain Midnight decoder badge. I mean, I think speaking in code and secret language is something we all do, either as children when we're, actually setting out to write something in code, but also the kind of shorthand language we share with our loved ones, so that one word can conjure a whole story or memory. Everybody in the room laughs. You don't even have to tell the story anymore. Or we all have objects, your kind of traditional souvenir, but even objects that no one would recognize as a souvenir. And yet we have whole stories that stem from them, these pieces in our lives that represent years or a certain period of life. So I was thinking about all the ways we communicate our stories, and all the ways that when we're no longer here, what do these objects and bits of language say about us? I think that as children, there's a lot we can never know about our parents and who they were as young people. And in the same way, as parents, there's so much we want to have access to about our children. And it just continues.
Are you a letter writer yourself?
I do love to write letters, and I love to get letters, and thinking of it more and more as we're in this age of rapid communication, or even in the midst of the pandemic, how wonderful it feels to actually get something that you hold onto, that's not some virtual piece of something.
Yeah, I feel people probably are pretty hungry for that these days, something tangible.
Yes, I think so too.
And there's so many of us who can't see each other right now. That even compounds the need to have that connection with something tangible versus, Zoom is nice and convenient, but it's not the same.
No, it's not the same. And I think that I mean, obviously this novel was written pre-pandemic. This novel was written pre-Me Too movement, even though it certainly explores a lot of that topic as well. But I think that during this pandemic, we're all left with our memories in a very different way. And I was saying to someone the other day, what I wouldn't give to be annoyed by the person in the movie theater hogging the armrest, or on an airplane, or standing in a crowded line waiting to get in to hear music you really want to hear. So I think this pandemic has forced all of us, I mean, my children are grown and out of the house, so I have not hugged my children since February, or visited my mother. She's in nursing care, so I've had to go to the window. And, things that I would not have thought about last January.
Oh, yeah, all those things that at one time felt like obligations sometimes now feel like, boy, do I wish I could do that. I would appreciate it. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's a lot of what's going on in the novel. I like to use as the example when Lil comes across a receipt from the grocery store, the kind of thing that, if you were cleaning up on the average day, you would just throw in the trash can, and for some reason it didn't get thrown away. And so here she is with this receipt, and now she can't bear to throw it away because it was a day when she bought both baby food and the shaving cream her dad used. So suddenly it represents to her that stretch of years right in the middle of her life when she was both mother and daughter and running between the two. And so there's a lot of that. I think we all want to trick time. Obviously we buy lots of lotions and things in a tent, but at one point, Lil, who ran a dance school, as a younger person, one of her journal entries is, if I get up every day and lift my leg and hold it, or I stand on point for this long, can I trick time? Can I do this every day? And we think we can trick time. And then, all of a sudden, like I remember waking up the morning I needed reading glasses. I went to bed reading, and then I woke up and everything was blurred, and it seems it happened just that fast. And so the novel is a lot about trying to pinpoint those transitions in life that change us and sort of mark the miles as we go forward.
I do. I so remember that line from Lil. I was just, that was the best, because it's like, yeah, that's true. If only I'd done that all along, maybe I still could. And you're right about the reading classes as well. These things just kind of happen all of a sudden. But, Frank's an archaeologist. You were just talking about the kind of things we leave behind or things we collect. And often they dig up very mundane kind of things and try to recreate people's lives, from that. Going into that is always a lot of assumptions made about how people live. Did you think about that whole mindset of Frank as an archaeologist when you were writing some of this?
Well, I did. While I was reading, I came across this wonderful piece talking about how when digs happen near schools and orphanages, that it's very common to find these little caches of toys buried away. Some special thing that a child is trying to protect and preserve. And I was also thinking how, for a long time, I wasn't sure how Shelley and Harvey and Frank and Lil connected in this present day life. But as soon as I realized the actual house connects them, and then thinking of it as an archaeological dig. Harvey is growing up on top of where Frank once grew up. And Harvey's even finding these little bits, these tokens left behind that are connected to Frank's boyhood. So that's, for me, as soon as I recognize that, I just, it sort of clicked into place how those two characters connect.
Yeah, that's great, because it's, again, archaeology, layers, layers upon layers, go down to previous eras and generations and pasts, and So do you kind of come up with a character first, or it sounds like you do? You have your characters, but then you find your plot? Does plot sort of organic out of character? How do you do that?
I have ideas for characters. I very often have a Shelley-like character who's a little on the edge, precariously, which way is she? We know where she's going to fall, but which way? And then I love to have an elderly person on the page, and I love to have a child on the page. I think that those two ends of life represent a kind of liberated freedom. I mean, the child has not grown the filter yet. And the person at the other end has either lost the filter or they just don't give a damn anymore. It's all done, and here's my final, I'm just going to take my turn. It's my turn. So there's this great freedom at those two ends of the spectrum, I think. And I love working with kid characters. I think they're hard in many ways. And Harvey was born with a cleft lip. And as soon as I realized that, something that his mother at birth felt so responsible for, and it just really traumatized her. And yet Harvey, up until about age 5, has just been this joyful, laughing little boy, completely unaffected. Only now is he self-conscious, and it's because of what has come into him. Other people noticing, other people asking. And so I keep this as my prop, he's a little guy with a whole mustache collection. And as soon as I, put Harvey in mustaches with whatever else he was doing in life, it really opened the door to him, because you could have this child in what is a frightening, serious moment, but it's comical, because he's like trying to mask himself with this fake mustache. And that is where, like, during the course of just reading about things like night terrors, because he's sort of haunted by some things and having a lot of issues, as is his mother. But I read that interesting fact about how that Maro reflex that we think so cute in infants, where they're reaching for their mothers. And I read where that is the only innate fear. That's what a human comes in with, fear of losing the mother. And all the other fears are learned. And that made a lot of sense for this novel too. I mean, I think in many ways they're all reaching out to claim those parents, for better or worse, to make sense of and hold on to. But it's also about all the other fears that affect our lives, and they're fears that are imposed on us. But the person at the end of life knows many.
You know, as I hear you talk about this, I just want to make sure people know what a rich book this is. And that's because there's all these things that you as a reader will find and contemplate on that are concrete things that all point back to this whole idea that you just talked about with the, I guess, the theme. I know you don't set out to write a theme, but, you know, still it's there. And it's little, and there were points I was almost in tears, and in a good way, with your prose, because it's just, yes, that's true. You know, it kind of sums up sort of the human experience, the family experience in so many ways. And then you did find those two real events that also play into a big part of what's going on with these characters. How did that come about?
Yeah, you know, I grew up hearing about the train wreck because my dad, in his boyhood, had, of course, gone, as many people had, to see the aftermath of it all. And there's no book about that train wreck. They're just newspaper accounts. And in everything I read, you would come down to this list of items. You know, it happened in December, so Christmas presents everywhere, you know, so you know that strewn along these tracks were objects selected by one person for another person. There was a bridal veil up in the tree. And people were identified by objects you would think nothing of when you're getting up that morning, getting dressed. But then this event happens, and suddenly the list are identifying people with dry cleaning tags, or the label out of a coat, or a wedding band with initials inside. And so everything becomes intimate and so personal to that individual. And I lived for 20 years in the Boston area. My children grew up there, and no sooner did I move there, but I was so aware of how often I would hear the Coconut Grove fire referred to, you know, someone whose grandmother had been there or knew someone who had been there, or all the stories of the people who were supposed to be there and then not. Bring those questions to mind, both human error and fate putting us in a certain place at a certain time. Frank's mother was with his father on this train traveling home, but because she's pregnant, she has to get up and waddle through these various train cars looking for a restroom, and as a result was in a different place in the train. And that actually happened, you know, to someone, you know, that you got up, you moved, and because you moved at that moment, your life is spared. If you go walk the tracks, there's nothing that marks that this happened. And yet, back to an archaeological eye, you know, if anyone ever dug there, there would be all the traces and clues.
So what is your writing day like?
I sort of feel like I'm always writing. I'm always taking notes. I'm always stashing and getting ready. Fixing to get ready, as we say in the South. And I store up for big blocks of time when I can really sit down and assemble the parts. I do a lot of work longhand, and just working on these little bits and pieces that I know eventually will fold into it. Before I had kids, I was very regimented, you know, oh, I have to write early in the morning and I write this long, and my daughter was born, you know, 31 years ago, and I'm like, oh, well, if I'm ever going to do this again, I've got to change and be a little more flexible. And I did, you know, I became a portable writer, and just feeling like, well, I could do it anytime. And then, you know, when your kids' lives get very busy and you're struggling for time as a writer, and you would know this as well, you know, if you say, I'm going to go in this room all by myself and spend the afternoon all by myself, thinking my thoughts, writing my thoughts, nobody's happy about that. But if you say, I'm going to go to the grocery store and buy all your favorite foods and what we're going to have for dinner, everybody's happy and they don't even care that you're gone. And I have written many scenes parked in the parking lot of, for years it was, Super Stop and Shop in Massachusetts, Food Lion at this end, or Harris Teeter, so you just sit in the parking lot and you get home and you say, oh my gosh, it was so crowded, and and nobody notices. Again, it's so I learned all these portable ways that you can have your writing life within the domestic one. And then, as they got older and did understand that I actually was doing something, it became a little bit easier to carve out that time. But
yeah, it was like, okay, Mom's going to buy a bunch of really good stuff. She's been gone for a long time.
Yeah, sometimes they were disappointed.
So now you're a teacher as well. So you've worked with, I'm sure, a lot of aspiring writers. What kind of advice do you give them or have for them?
The advice I give is there's the more you write, the more you write, and so even those days when you're not quite sure where it's going, I'm really big on just keep looking, and I think sometimes the trick is to maybe turn your attention to some aspect of that character's life. What is this character interested in? And you go and you read a little bit there and dabble. And it's amazing how all the pieces start to find a way of connecting. I like to tell my students that we will never be as smart as our subconscious. It's always like several steps out there in front of us. I think if you know what your character loves more than anything else, and you also know what stands to threaten that person, what's the kryptonite for this character, then you've pretty much got everything you need.
Are you writing a lot right now?
I'm sort of here in the aftermath of the novel. I have a lot of stories sketched out. So I'm dabbling on stories and starting to kick around ideas for the next novel. For readers of my last novel, Life After Life, I ended that novel. There was a murder that was not solved, because I really felt that was the realistic ending, that sadly there are many people on the edges of our society who disappear and it doesn't get solved. And I made that choice in the novel, but so many people were upset with me that I left it that way, that I chose to have that as the trial that Shelley is working as the court stenographer. And so for those readers of Life After Life who were upset that justice was not served, I circle back. So I do sometimes like to go back and peek on characters from earlier books.
Jill McCorkle, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. And congratulations on your new book, Hieroglyphics. It is a really amazing work.
Thank you so much, Kathy, and wonderful questions. It's just been a pleasure, and I'm just sorry we're not sitting in a room together somewhere. I'll look forward to that someday.
I will too. Thank you again.
Thank you.